Under the surface of everyday awareness, the human body is constantly gathering information, not just from the outside world, but from within itself. Signals about balance, position, temperature, internal chemistry and motion are being detected, processed, and acted upon continuously, often without ever becoming conscious experience. This activity is not subtle in scale, only in notice. Muscles adjust before thought forms. Breathing shifts in response to chemistry rather than intention. Orientation is maintained even in darkness or stillness. These processes are not occasional aids. They are fundamental to how the body remains stable, coordinated, and alive. For much of history, sensation was described using a small and familiar set of categories: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch offered a tidy framework that matched surface experience well enough to endure. It felt complete because it aligned with what could be easily named and noticed. As scientific tools improved, that simplicity began to loosen. Careful measurements revealed specialized receptors where none had been assumed. Pathways appeared that carried information without ever announcing themselves as feeling. Sensory activity turned out to be far more distributed, layered, and continuous than everyday language suggested. What emerged was not a contradiction of common experience, but an expansion of it. The familiar senses did not disappear. They were joined by others, equally real, equally measurable, but far less obvious. Many of them operate best precisely because they remain unnoticed. Some of these systems guide movement before intention forms. Others monitor internal balance long before discomfort appears. Together they shape behavior, posture, emotion, and awareness in ways that feel effortless only because they are so deeply embedded. This understanding did not arrive through a single moment of revelation. It developed slowly through physiology, neuroscience, and clinical observation. Definition shifted as evidence accumulated. Sensation came to be understood not as a short list, but as an ongoing exchange between body and environment. Research continues to refine this picture, mapping how these systems interact and overlap. Across laboratories and disciplines, the findings converge. The same hidden sensory processes appear again and again, performing their quiet work with remarkable reliability. What this suggests is not excess or confusion, but organization. A body structured to sense continuously, adjusting itself long before awareness is required. A system that knows more about its state than conscious thought ever needs to. Welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. If you enjoy settling into calm, careful explorations like this, you're very welcome to stay. And if you feel like it, you can share where in the world you're listening from tonight. It's always grounding to know how widely these quiet ideas travel. For most people, the idea of human senses feels settled long before it is ever questioned. From early childhood, the world is explained through a familiar list: sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. 5 neat categories that seem to account for everything felt, noticed, and experienced. The idea is simple, memorable, and surprisingly resilient. That resilience has very little to do with biology. The 5-sense model traces back to classical philosophy, most often associated with Aristotle, writing in the 4th century before the Common Era. His goal was not to catalogue every way the body gathers information, but to describe how living beings interact with their surroundings in ways that are immediately apparent. Light enters the eyes, vibrations reach the ears, substances contact the tongue and nose, surfaces press against the skin. These were the senses that announced themselves clearly, without instruments, measurements, or microscopes. It was a practical framework, not a biological inventory. At the time, there was no way to observe nerve impulses, receptor cells, or internal feedback systems. Anatomy relied on surface inspection and limited dissection. Physiology, as a scientific discipline, did not yet exist. Concepts like electrical signaling in nerves or specialized sensory receptors lay more than 2,000 years in the future. Under those constraints, it made sense to focus on what could be directly noticed. Over time, that philosophical model hardened into something else. As it passed through medieval scholarship, early education systems, and eventually modern classrooms, it quietly transformed from a descriptive idea into a rule. The five senses stopped being a starting point and began to feel like a boundary. What made the model so successful was not its completeness, but its usefulness. It offered a clean way to organize experience. It was easy to teach, easy to remember, and aligned well with how perception feels from the inside. Most sensory activity that demands attention does in fact arrive through those five familiar channels. The problem is not that the model is wrong. The problem is that it is incomplete. Early anatomical science simply lacked the tools to see what lay beneath conscious awareness. Internal signals do not announce themselves the way light or sound does. There is no obvious sensation attached to knowing where your elbow is when your eyes are closed. Balance does not usually feel like anything at all until it fails. Internal chemistry quietly adjusts breathing and heart rate without asking for permission or attention. Because these processes are subtle, constant, and mostly invisible, they were easy to overlook. Philosophy focused on experience. Anatomy focused on structure. Neither could easily capture systems that operate in silence. It was only with the rise of experimental physiology in the 19th century that this picture began to change. As scientists learned to measure nerve activity, muscle responses, and internal feedback loops, sensation stopped being defined by what feels vivid and started being defined by how information moves. Modern neuroscience approaches sensation very differently. Instead of asking whether something feels like a sense, it asks whether there are specialized receptors designed to detect a specific type of stimulus, whether those receptors convert physical or chemical changes into neural signals, and whether those signals travel along identifiable pathways to the brain. By that definition, sensation does not require awareness. It requires detection, transmission, and interpretation. This shift matters. Once sensation is understood as a biological process rather than a subjective feeling, the list of human senses expands quickly. Balance qualifies, body position qualifies, internal temperature qualifies. Chemical monitoring of blood gases qualifies. Even the detection of tissue damage qualifies, despite pain feeling very different from sight or sound. Research institutions studying human physiology, including national health bodies and neuroscience laboratories around the world, now routinely describe sensory systems that never appear on the traditional list. These systems are mapped, measured, and tested with the same rigor as vision or hearing. They are not speculative additions. They are established parts of how the nervous system operates. What makes this expansion feel strange is that many of these senses work best when they are unnoticed. Vision demands attention. Balance demands obedience. When it functions well, it disappears from awareness entirely. Proprioception, the sense that tells you where your body parts are in space, only becomes noticeable when it's disrupted. Internal sensing quietly adjusts posture, breathing, and movement long before discomfort appears. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. Sensory systems that manage stability, coordination, and survival do not benefit from constant conscious oversight. They benefit from speed, reliability, and automatic control. Awareness in these cases would be inefficient. So why does the five-sense idea persist so strongly? Part of the answer is cultural inertia. Educational models tend to favour clarity over completeness, especially when teaching young minds. 5 is a comfortable number. It fits on a diagram. It fits in a sentence. Expanding the list complicates things quickly. Another reason is that language itself reinforces the illusion. Everyday speech treats sensing as something that happens to the mind, rather than something the body is doing continuously. People talk about seeing or hearing, but rarely about sensing joint position or blood chemistry, even though those processes are just as real. There's also a subtle psychological comfort in believing that perception is limited to what is consciously noticed. It gives the impression that experience is tidy, contained, and under control. Acknowledging that the body is gathering vast amounts of information without awareness can feel slightly unsettling at first. But this broader view does not undermine human experience, it enriches it. Understanding that the 5 senses are a teaching shortcut rather than a biological limit reframes perception as something layered and cooperative. The vivid senses sit on top of quieter systems, all feeding into a brain that integrates, filters, and prioritizes information based on context and need. Modern neuroscience does not replace the familiar senses. It embeds them within a much larger network. A network that explains why balance affects vision, why internal state shapes emotion, and why movement feels effortless when everything is working as it should. The 5 senses were never meant to carry this weight alone. They were an opening description, not a final word. Seen that way, the myth is not that the 5 senses exist. It is that they are all there is. Before it becomes possible to expand the list of human senses, something quieter needs to be settled first. What, exactly, counts as a sense in scientific terms? Not in everyday language, and not in how it feels subjectively, but in the way biology and neuroscience actually define the process. In common speech, a sense is something noticed, something that arrives in awareness. You see light, hear sound, feel pressure, taste sweetness, smell smoke. From that perspective, sensing seems inseparable from conscious experience. If nothing is noticed, it feels reasonable to assume that nothing is being sensed. Biology does not work that way. In scientific terms, a sense begins long before awareness appears. It starts with specialized cells known as sensory receptors. These cells are tuned to detect specific kinds of physical or chemical changes in the body or environment. Some respond to light striking their surface. Others respond to molecules binding to them. Others respond to stretching, pressure, temperature change, or chemical imbalance. Each receptor type is selective. It does not respond to everything. It responds to something in particular. When that specific stimulus is detected, the receptor converts it into a signal the nervous system can use. This process is known as sensory transduction. Physical energy or chemical change is transformed into an electrical signal that can travel along nerves. That signal does not yet feel like anything. At this stage, it is simply information moving. From there, the signal follows a dedicated pathway. It travels through peripheral nerves, enters the spinal cord or brainstem, and is routed towards specific regions of the brain. Different sensory systems use different routes. Vision takes one path, balance takes another, internal chemical sensing takes yet another. This organization is not accidental, it is precise, repeatable, and measurable. Receptor theory, developed through the work of 19th and early 20th century physiologists, formalized this idea. Scientists such as Johannes Müller proposed that the nature of a sensory experience depends not on the stimulus itself, but on the type of receptor and nerve pathway involved. Light striking the eye produces vision, not because light is special, but because the optic nerve carries that information to visual regions of the brain. Stimulate that same nerve electrically, and the brain still reports light. What matters is the channel, not the trigger. This principle remains foundational in modern sensory physiology. A sense is defined by a class of receptors tuned to a specific stimulus, a method of transducing that stimulus into neural signals, and a pathway that delivers those signals into the nervous system for processing. Conscious awareness may occur later, but it is not required for the system to function. This distinction between sensory processing and conscious perception is crucial. Many sensory systems operate continuously without ever announcing themselves. Blood chemistry is monitored moment by moment. Joint position is tracked with remarkable precision. Balance is adjusted dozens of times per second. None of this requires attention. In fact, attention would only get in the way. Clinical medicine makes this separation very clear. Physicians routinely test sensory function that patients are not normally aware of. Reflexes are checked. Balance responses are observed. Nerve conduction is measured. Loss of a sensory pathway can be detected even when a person has never consciously noticed that pathway operating. In neurological disorders, this difference becomes especially obvious. Damage to certain sensory systems can dramatically impair movement, coordination, or regulation without affecting the 5 familiar senses at all. A person may see, hear, smell, taste, and touch perfectly well, yet struggle to stand upright or coordinate motion because an internal sensory system has been disrupted. From a scientific standpoint, it would be strange not to count those systems as senses. Major research bodies, including national health institutes and neuroscience organizations, rely on these definitions when studying perception, movement, and regulation. In research literature, sensory systems are classified based on receptors and pathways, not on whether the resulting information feels vivid or reportable. This is why modern textbooks often list many more senses than 5. The exact number varies, not because scientists are unsure whether these systems exist, but because classification depends on how finely one chooses to divide them. Temperature sensing can be treated as one sense or several. Pain can be grouped or subdivided. Chemical sensing can be split by function. The disagreement is not about reality, it is about categorization. What remains consistent is the underlying logic. If a system detects a specific stimulus using specialized receptors, converts that detection into neural signals, and delivers those signals along defined pathways, it qualifies as a sensory system. Awareness is optional. This perspective also explains why some senses feel so different from others. Vision delivers rich, detailed information to areas of the brain associated with conscious perception. Balance delivers corrective signals to motor systems. Internal sensing delivers regulatory information to autonomic networks. All are senses. They simply serve different roles. Seen this way, the traditional 5 senses are not special because they are senses. They are special because they are the senses most closely tied to conscious experience and communication. They dominate language, memory, and storytelling. They are how humans describe the world to one another. Biology, however, is less concerned with description than with function. Once sensation is defined by receptors and pathways rather than by feeling, the apparent mystery around additional senses fades. The question stops being how many senses humans have and becomes how many distinct kinds of information the body needs to monitor in order to function. The answer to that question is necessarily larger than 5. This clarity matters because it prevents the discussion from drifting into exaggeration or novelty. Expanding the list of senses is not about discovering hidden abilities or unlocking unused potential. It is about recognizing systems that have been studied, measured, and relied upon in medicine and science for decades. Understanding what counts as a sense allows the body to be seen as it is. Not a passive receiver of a few external signals, but an active, continuous monitoring system, tuned to many aspects of both the world and itself. With that definition in place, the familiar picture of perception begins to open up, calmly and without contradiction, into something far more complete. There is a sense at work right now that rarely asks for attention, yet quietly governs almost every movement you make. It keeps the world upright when you turn your head. It prevents the ground from feeling like it is sliding away when you stand up. It allows you to walk, run, and reach without constantly recalculating where down is. This sense is balance. More precisely, it is the vestibular system, a sensory system housed deep within the inner ear, and it is one of the clearest examples that human sensation extends well beyond the familiar 5. Unlike sight or sound, balance does not usually announce itself as a feeling. When it works properly, it feels like nothing at all, which is exactly why it went unnoticed for so long. The vestibular system sits beside the structures responsible for hearing, sharing the same small spiral-shaped region of bone. Despite this close proximity, its role is entirely different. Hearing detects vibrations in the air. Balance detects motion, orientation, and the constant pull of gravity. Without it, the world would not merely feel unsteady, it would feel incoherent. At the core of this system are 2 main components, the semicircular canals and the otolith organs. Together they form a biological motion detector of remarkable precision. The semicircular canals are 3 fluid-filled loops arranged at right angles to one another. This orientation allows them to detect rotation in all directions. When the head turns, fluid inside these canals lags slightly behind due to inertia. That movement bends tiny hair like structures inside the canals. Those hairs are connected to sensory receptors that convert mechanical movement into neural signals. The brain receives those signals and interprets them as rotational motion. This process happens continuously. Turn your head to look at something, tilt it slightly, nod. Each movement generates patterns of fluid motion inside the canals, and each pattern is translated into information about how the head is moving through space. The otolith organs handle a different task. They detect linear acceleration and orientation relative to gravity. These organs contain small crystals made of calcium carbonate, embedded in a gelatinous layer above sensory receptors. When you accelerate forward, slow down, or tilt your head, the crystals shift slightly. That shift bends the receptors beneath them, generating signals that inform the brain about straight-line motion and which way is down. This is not a vague impression. It is a constant quantitative stream of information. The brain is receiving updates about head position and motion many times per second, adjusting posture and eye movement accordingly. Vestibular physiology has been studied extensively within neuroscience and otolaryngology, the medical field concerned with the ear, nose, and throat. Clinical tests can measure vestibular function with precision, tracking eye movements and balance responses to assess whether the system is working properly. When it is not, the effects are unmistakable. One of the most familiar disruptions of vestibular function is motion sickness. When signals from the vestibular system conflict with signals from vision, the brain receives incompatible information about motion. For example, reading inside a moving vehicle may tell the eyes that the body is still, while the inner ear reports acceleration and turns. The mismatch triggers nausea, dizziness, and disorientation. This response is not psychological, it is a sensory conflict. Another dramatic example appears in vestibular disorders, where damage to the inner ear or its nerve pathways can leave people unable to maintain balance. Standing upright becomes difficult. Walking requires intense concentration. Even sitting still may feel unstable. In severe cases, the world appears to bounce or blur with every head movement, because the vestibular system can no longer stabilize vision properly. That stabilization is one of the vestibular system's most important functions. Every time you move your head, your eyes reflexively adjust to compensate. This is known as the vestibulo-ocular reflex. When you turn your head to the right, your eyes automatically move to the left, keeping your gaze fixed on whatever you are looking at. This happens far too quickly for conscious control. The adjustment occurs within fractions of a second, driven entirely by vestibular input. Without this reflex, the visual world would smear and jump with every step. Reading would be nearly impossible while walking. Faces would blur as soon as you nodded or turned your head. The fact that none of this normally happens is a testament to how effectively the vestibular system works behind the scenes. Posture is also continuously regulated by vestibular input. Signals from the inner ear feed into spinal and motor circuits that adjust muscle tone throughout the body. When you lean slightly, your muscles respond before you consciously register the shift. Balance corrections occur automatically, often dozens of times per minute, preventing falls without ever demanding attention. What makes the vestibular system such a powerful example of an additional human sense is how cleanly it fits the scientific definition. It has specialized receptors. It detects specific stimuli, namely rotation, acceleration, and gravitational orientation. It converts those stimuli into neural signals, and it sends those signals along dedicated pathways to the brain. By every biological criterion, it is a sense, yet it rarely appears on lists taught in school, not because it is obscure or disputed, but because it does not usually feel like sensing. There is no vivid colour, no sharp sound, no identifiable taste. Balance is experienced indirectly, through stability and coordination, rather than directly as a sensation. When people say they feel balanced, they usually mean they feel comfortable or steady. They are not referring to a distinct sensory quality. The sensory work itself remains invisible. This invisibility may explain why the vestibular system was historically overlooked. Philosophy focused on what could be described introspectively. Early science focused on what could be seen and touched. Balance, operating silently and automatically, slip between those categories. Modern neuroscience leaves little room for doubt. The vestibular system is mapped in detail. Its receptors are identified. Its neural pathways are traced. Its function is measured clinically and experimentally. It is as real and as fundamental as vision or hearing. It also illustrates an important point. Some of the most essential senses are the ones you almost never notice. Balance does not enrich experience by adding detail. It enriches experience by preventing chaos. It keeps the world visually stable. It allows movement to feel natural. It supports nearly every physical action without asking for recognition. Seen in this light, the 5 familiar senses begin to look less like a complete set, and more like the most noticeable members of a much larger group. balance simply happens to be the first additional sense that science identified clearly and unanimously. Once it is recognized, the idea that humans possess more than 5 senses stops feeling controversial. It starts to feel obvious. The body has always needed to know which way is up. It has always needed to detect motion before thought can intervene. The only thing that changed was the willingness to call that process what it is: a sense. There is another sense at work even when the room is dark, the eyes are closed, and the body is perfectly still. It tells you where your hands are resting. It lets you scratch your head without looking. It allows you to bring a cup to your mouth without rehearsing the movement in your mind. This sense is proprioception. Proprioception is the ability to know the position, movement, and force of your own body parts without relying on vision. It is how the brain keeps track of the body's shape in space from one moment to the next. Like balance, it is rarely noticed when it works well, and immediately obvious when it does not. The information behind this sense comes from a network of specialized receptors embedded throughout the body. Muscles, tendons, and joints are not just mechanical structures, they are sensory organs in their own right. Within muscles are muscle spindles, tiny structures that detect changes in muscle length and the speed of those changes. When a muscle stretches or contracts, these spindles respond instantly, sending signals to the nervous system about how the muscle is behaving. This allows the brain to know not only where a limb is, but how quickly it is moving. Tendons, which connect muscles to bones, contain receptors known as tendon organs. These receptors monitor force. They detect how much tension a muscle is producing as it pulls on a bone. This information helps regulate strength, preventing muscles from generating damaging levels of force and allowing fine control during delicate tasks. Joint receptors add another layer of information. Located near the joints, they respond to pressure and movement at the extremes of joint position. Together with muscle and tendon signals, they help the brain construct a continuous 3-dimensional map of the body. All of this information is delivered to the brain constantly. There is no on-off switch. Even at rest, the nervous system is receiving updates about limb position, muscle tension, and joint angle. These signals feed directly into motor regions of the brain and spinal cord, shaping movement before conscious intention enters the picture. Neuroscience and motor control research have studied proprioception extensively, not because it feels interesting, but because movement fails without it. Experiments have shown that when proprioceptive feedback is disrupted, even simple actions become slow and effortful. Tasks that normally require no thought suddenly demand intense concentration. Clinical cases make this even clearer. Individuals who lose proprioceptive input due to nerve damage or certain neurological conditions can retain full muscle strength and normal sensation of touch, yet struggle to move accurately. Without proprioceptive feedback, they must watch their limbs constantly in order to guide them. Looking away, even briefly, can cause movements to drift or collapse. One well-documented case involved a man who lost proprioception in much of his body following a rare illness. He described feeling as though his body had vanished unless he could see it. Standing upright required visual confirmation. Walking demanded continuous attention. What had once been automatic became exhausting. These cases reveal an important truth. Movement is not commanded solely by the brain. It is negotiated. The nervous system issues instructions, receives feedback, and adjusts in real time. Proprioception is the feedback that makes this loop possible. This feedback loop is so reliable that it usually fades from awareness. When you reach for an object, your hand arrives where you expect it to be. When you walk, your feet land in predictable places. When you type, Your fingers find the right keys without conscious tracking. The sense doing the work remains invisible. Modern research institutions studying rehabilitation place proprioception at the center of recovery after injury or stroke. Therapy often focuses not just on rebuilding strength, but on restoring sensory feedback. Movement without sensation is unstable. Sensation without movement is incomplete. The same principles have shaped robotics and artificial intelligence research. Engineers attempting to build machines that move smoothly through the world quickly discover that vision alone is insufficient. Without internal sensors reporting joint position and force, movement becomes clumsy and unreliable. In this way, robotics has independently rediscovered the importance of proprioception. What makes this sense particularly striking is how little it resembles the traditional image of sensing. There is no colour, no sound, no smell. There is not even a clear feeling attached to it. Proprioception expresses itself through accuracy, coordination, and ease. From a scientific perspective, there is no ambiguity about its status. Proprioception has specialized receptors. It detects specific stimuli related to stretch, tension, and joint position. It converts those stimuli into neural signals. It uses dedicated pathways to deliver that information to the brain. By every criterion used in sensory physiology, it qualifies as a sense. Its absence would be immediately disabling. Its presence is quietly indispensable. Like balance, proprioception reveals a pattern. Some of the most important senses are not the ones that decorate experience. They are the ones that make experience possible in the first place. The body knows where it is before the mind ever asks. There is a vast landscape of sensation that never comes from the eyes, ears, skin, nose, or tongue. It does not describe the outside world at all. Instead, it reports on the condition of the body itself. How fast the heart is beating, how full the lungs feel, whether energy stores are running low, whether fluids need replenishing, whether something inside is slightly off balance. This inward-facing sensory system is known as interoception. Interoception is the sense through which the nervous system monitors the internal state of the body. It is how the brain stays informed about what is happening beneath the surface of conscious awareness. Unlike vision or hearing, interoception does not usually produce clear images or sounds. It produces tendencies, urges, and subtle shifts in feeling that guide behavior long before rational thought steps in. Every moment, receptors throughout the body are sampling internal conditions. Specialized sensors in blood vessels detect changes in blood pressure and chemistry. Receptors in the lungs track the stretch of each breath. Cells in the digestive system report fullness, nutrient content, and irritation. Together, these signals form a continuous internal report. Heart rate is one of the most familiar interoceptive signals. Most of the time, it goes unnoticed. The heart speeds up during exertion and slows during rest, adjusting automatically to demand. Only when the rhythm changes abruptly or becomes unusually strong does awareness flicker into focus. The signal was always there. Attention simply caught up late. Breathing follows a similar pattern. While it can be consciously controlled, it is primarily regulated by interoceptive feedback. Chemoreceptors monitor carbon dioxide levels in the blood and cerebrospinal fluid. When those levels rise, the drive to breathe increases. This process operates independently of intention. Even during sleep, breathing adjusts to internal chemistry with remarkable precision. Hunger and thirst are also interoceptive experiences. They are not simple reflections of an empty stomach or dry mouth. They are complex signals generated by hormonal changes, blood nutrient levels, and activity in specific brain regions. Long before discomfort appears, the body is already signaling that resources need replenishing. Thirst, in particular, is tightly regulated. A loss of even a small percentage of body water can impair physical and cognitive performance. Osmoreceptors in the brain detect changes in blood concentration and trigger thirst before dehydration becomes dangerous. This early warning system is interoception doing preventative work. Visceral sensations such as discomfort in the gut or a sense of tightness in the chest also belong to this internal sensory world. These sensations are often vague, difficult to localize, and hard to describe precisely. That imprecision once led them to be dismissed as non-sensory or purely emotional. Modern physiology tells a different story. Neuroscience research has shown that interoceptive signals travel along specific pathways to dedicated brain regions. One key area is the insular cortex, which integrates internal sensory information and contributes to conscious feeling states. Activity in this region correlates with awareness of heartbeat, breathing, and internal bodily changes. Researchers studying interoception have found strong links between internal sensing and emotional experience. Emotions are not generated in isolation from the body. They're shaped by patterns of heart rate, breathing, and visceral feedback. Anxiety, for example, is often accompanied by heightened interoceptive signals from the heart and lungs. Calm states show different internal signatures. This does not mean emotions are nothing but bodily sensations. It means the brain uses interoceptive information as part of how it constructs emotional experience. The body and mind are not separate conversations. They are parts of the same loop. Physiologists have long recognized the importance of this loop for survival. Interoception supports regulation, a process known as homeostasis. Body temperature, blood pressure, glucose levels, and fluid balance are all kept within narrow ranges through constant sensory monitoring. When regulation fails, illness follows quickly. From this perspective, interoception is not an optional extra. It is a core sensory system that keeps the organism alive. Without it, the body would not know when to eat, drink, rest, or respond to internal threat. Medical science relies heavily on this system, even if it is rarely named explicitly in everyday conversation. Conditions such as heart disease, respiratory disorders, and metabolic illnesses all involve disruptions to interoceptive signaling. Symptoms often appear when internal sensing detects a deviation from normal ranges. Interestingly, interoception also varies between individuals. Some people are more sensitive to internal signals than others. This can be measured experimentally by asking participants to estimate their own heartbeats without touching a pulse. Accuracy varies widely. Higher interoceptive sensitivity has been linked to stronger emotional awareness, but also to increased vulnerability to anxiety in some cases. This variability highlights an important feature of sensory systems. More sensitivity is not always better. Regulation depends on balance, not intensity. Interoception must be reliable, but not overwhelming. Signals need to be informative without dominating attention. Because interoceptive signals are subtle and continuous, they rarely draw attention unless something changes abruptly. Illness, injury, or stress can amplify these signals, making the body feel louder than usual. When health is restored, the noise fades again into the background. From a scientific standpoint, there is no question that interoception qualifies as a sense. It has specialized receptors. It detects specific internal stimuli. It converts those detections into neural signals. It delivers them to the brain along defined pathways. It influences perception, behavior, and physiology. What sets it apart is direction. While many senses are oriented outward, interoception is oriented inward. It does not describe the external environment. It describes the internal one. This inward focus expands the idea of sensing beyond interaction with the world to include maintenance of the self. The body is not just reacting to what happens outside. It is continuously monitoring and adjusting itself from within. Seen this way, sensing becomes less about collecting experiences and more about maintaining balance. The nervous system is not simply a window onto the world. It is a regulator, using sensory information to keep the body within safe and functional limits. Interoception reminds us that perception is not only about awareness, it is about stability. It is about knowing when something needs to change before damage occurs. It is about acting early, quietly, and effectively. The outside world may capture attention, but the inside world keeps everything running. And it does so without asking to be noticed. Touch is often spoken about as though it were a single sense, one category, one stream of information. Pressure arrives at the skin, and the brain responds. Simple and intuitive. Biology tells a more detailed story. What is commonly called touch is actually a collection of separate sensory systems working side by side. Pressure is one, vibration is another, stretch is another, and temperature belongs to its own distinct category entirely. The ability to detect heat and cold is known as thermoreception, and it operates independently from the sense that detects pressure or texture. Even though both systems share the same surface, they ask very different questions. One asks what is touching the body, the other asks how warm or cold that contact is and whether it poses a risk. This distinction becomes obvious when something goes wrong. People with certain nerve injuries can lose the ability to feel pressure while retaining sensitivity to temperature. Others experience the opposite. They can feel contact perfectly well, but cannot reliably tell whether something is hot or cold. These dissociations are not theoretical. They are observed clinical realities, and they reveal that temperature sensing follows its own rules. Thermoreception begins with specialized receptors embedded in the skin and deeper tissues. These receptors are tuned to specific temperature ranges. Some respond preferentially to cooling. Others respond to warming. Still others react most strongly to rapid changes rather than absolute temperature. These receptors are not vague indicators. They are precise biological instruments. When skin temperature shifts, even slightly, thermoreceptors change their activity. Cooling receptors increase their firing as temperature drops. Warming receptors increase their firing as temperature rises. The pattern of activity across these receptors provides the nervous system with detailed information about thermal conditions. Importantly, these signals do not simply report comfort, they report deviation. A mild, cool sensation may feel refreshing. A stronger one becomes uncomfortable. Push further, and it becomes painful. The same progression occurs with heat. Warmth becomes hot. Hot becomes dangerous. At the extreme ends, thermoreception blends into pain detection, activating protective responses. Research in sensory physiology has shown that temperature and pain pathways are closely related but not identical. Some receptors respond to innocuous temperature changes. Others activate only when temperatures approach levels that threaten tissue integrity. This layered system allows the body to respond proportionally, escalating warnings as conditions worsen. This separation explains why temperature can feel sharp or dull, pleasant or alarming depending on context. The sensation is not simply about heat energy. It is about what that energy means for the body. Neural pathways carrying thermal information are distinct from those carrying pressure or vibration. They enter the spinal cord along different routes and project to different regions of the brain. Imaging studies show that temperature activates areas associated with bodily regulation and protective behavior rather than purely tactile discrimination. In everyday experience, this distinction is easy to miss because temperature and touch often arrive together. When you pick up a mug, you feel its shape and its warmth at the same time. The sensations blend seamlessly, but they remain biologically separate streams of information, merged only later by the brain. Evolutionarily, this separation makes excellent sense. Pressure tells you that something is in contact with the body. Temperature tells you whether that contact is safe. A sharp object and a hot object can both damage tissue, but they require different responses. The nervous system benefits from having specialized detectors that can react quickly and appropriately to different kinds of threat. Temperature sensing is particularly critical because thermal damage can occur rapidly. Extreme heat denatures proteins and destroys cells. Extreme cold can impair circulation and damage tissue just as effectively. Detecting temperature change early allows withdrawal before injury occurs. This is why thermal sensations can feel urgent. A hot surface produces an immediate reflexive response, often faster than conscious awareness. The hand pulls away before the mind has time to label the sensation. This reflex is not dramatic. It is efficient. Thermoreception also plays a role in maintaining internal balance. Skin temperature provides information about environmental conditions, which the body uses to regulate blood flow, sweating, and shivering. These responses help maintain a stable internal temperature, even as external conditions change. Unlike pressure, which is mostly local, temperature sensing contributes to whole body regulation. A drop in skin temperature can trigger systemic responses aimed at conserving heat. A rise can trigger cooling mechanisms. These adjustments occur automatically, guided by sensory input rather than conscious decision. Interestingly, temperature perception is not purely objective. The same temperature can feel different depending on recent exposure, expectations, and physiological state. A cool room feels colder after warmth. Warm water feels hotter after cold. The receptors report physical changes, but the brain interprets them in context. This contextual interpretation does not undermine the sensory system. It demonstrates its flexibility. Thermoreception provides raw data. The nervous system integrates that data with prior conditions to guide behavior efficiently. From a scientific standpoint, temperature sensing meets every criterion used to define a sense. It has specialized receptors. It detects a specific class of stimuli. It converts physical changes into neural signals. It uses dedicated pathways. It produces predictable, measurable responses. It also illustrates why the category of touch is misleadingly broad. Grouping pressure, vibration, stretch, and temperature under a single label hides the diversity of sensory systems operating at the skin. What feels like one sense is actually several, layered together and coordinated by the brain. This matters because it reshapes how sensation is understood. The body does not rely on a few general-purpose channels. It relies on many specialized ones, each tuned to a different aspect of the physical world. Temperature is not a flavor of touch. It is a separate stream of information, one that carries its own priorities and triggers its own responses. Its importance is easy to overlook precisely because it is so familiar. Warmth and cold are everyday experiences. They fade into the background of daily life. But their absence or distortion quickly reveals how essential they are. Without reliable temperature sensing, the body would be slow to react to danger. Regulation would falter. Tissue damage would become more likely. Survival would be compromised. The quiet precision of thermoreception underscores a broader pattern. Sensation is not organized around how experiences feel to consciousness. It is organized around what information the body needs to remain functional. Touch, as it turns out, was never a single sense at all. Pain has a reputation that few other senses share. It is unwelcome, intrusive, and difficult to ignore. It demands attention in a way that vision or balance rarely does. Because of this, pain is often treated as something separate from sensation, more emotional than informational, more subjective than scientific. Biology takes a different view. At its foundation, pain begins with a sensory system known as nociception. Nociception is the process by which the nervous system detects conditions that threaten to damage tissue, or have already done so. It is not the same thing as suffering, distress, or fear. Those experiences may follow, but nociception itself is about detection. The receptors responsible for this detection are called nociceptors. They are specialized sensory receptors found in the skin, muscles, joints, and internal organs. Each type of nociceptor responds to a particular category of potentially harmful stimulus. Some nociceptors respond to extreme temperatures. Others respond to intense pressure or mechanical damage. Still others are sensitive to chemical signals released when tissue is injured or inflamed. This diversity allows the nervous system to distinguish between different kinds of threat, even when the resulting experience is grouped under the single word pain. Once activated, nociceptors convert these dangerous conditions into electrical signals. Those signals travel along dedicated nerve fibers toward the spinal cord and brain. Along the way, they may trigger reflexes that withdraw the body from harm before conscious awareness has time to form. This rapid response highlights an important feature of pain. Its primary function is protective, not experiential. Pain evolved to change behavior quickly. It pulls attention toward injury, promotes rest and avoidance, and encourages learning. Touch the hot surface once, and you're unlikely to repeat the experiment. Modern pain science has mapped multiple pathways that carry nociceptive information. Some signals travel rapidly, producing sharp, immediate sensations that prompt quick reactions. Others move more slowly, producing dull, aching sensations that linger and promote caution. Both serve different roles, and both are part of the same sensory system. What complicates pain, and often confuses discussions about it, is what happens once those signals reach the brain. Unlike many other sensory systems, pain is deeply shaped by context. Expectation, attention, emotional state, and past experience all influence how nociceptive signals are interpreted. The same physical injury can feel very different depending on circumstances. This does not mean pain is imagined or arbitrary. It means the brain actively modulates nociceptive input rather than passively receiving it. Neuroscience research has demonstrated that the brain can amplify or dampen pain signals. Under certain conditions, such as acute danger, pain can be temporarily suppressed, allowing action to continue. In other situations, anticipation or anxiety can heighten pain, making relatively minor injuries feel severe. These effects are not psychological tricks. They involve real changes in neural activity. Descending pathways from the brain can inhibit or enhance nociceptive transmission at the level of the spinal cord. Chemicals released within the nervous system can reduce signal strength or increase sensitivity. This modulation helps explain phenomena that once seemed puzzling. Soldiers wounded in battle sometimes report little pain until after danger has passed. Athletes may finish competitions before noticing injuries. Conversely, chronic pain can persist long after tissues have healed, driven by changes in neural processing rather than ongoing damage. Pain, then, is not a simple readout of injury. It is an interpretation shaped by biology, context, and experience. This complexity has led some to question whether pain should be considered a sense at all. It feels different from seeing light or hearing sound. It carries emotional weight. It can be distressing rather than informative. From a scientific perspective, however, pain meets the criteria clearly. Nociception involves specialized receptors tuned to specific stimuli. It converts physical and chemical threats into neural signals. It uses dedicated pathways. It produces consistent, measurable responses. These are the hallmarks of a sensory system. The emotional component of pain does not disqualify it as a sense. Many senses influence emotion. Smell can evoke powerful memories. Sound can trigger fear or comfort. Internal sensing shapes mood and motivation. Pain stands out only because its emotional impact is difficult to ignore. In fact, that emotional weight is part of its function. Pain that felt neutral would fail to motivate protective behavior. The unpleasantness is not a flaw. It is a feature shaped by evolution. Understanding pain as a sense also clarifies why it can be treated scientifically. Pain research has identified specific receptors, pathways, and brain regions involved in nociception. Treatments target these mechanisms directly, aiming to reduce harmful signaling while preserving protective function. This balance is crucial. Eliminating pain entirely would not be beneficial. Individuals who are born without functional nociception face serious risks. They may suffer repeated injuries without realizing it. Burns, fractures, and infections can go unnoticed until damage is severe. Pain, for all its discomfort, is an essential warning system. At the same time, pain can become maladaptive. Chronic pain conditions involve changes in the nervous system that cause pain to persist without ongoing injury. In these cases, the sensory system has become overly sensitive, generating signals that no longer serve a protective purpose. Pain science has worked carefully to distinguish between nociception and pain experience. Nociception refers to the sensory detection of threat. Pain refers to the conscious experience that may follow. One can occur without the other. Nociceptive signals can be present without pain, and pain can occur without clear nociceptive input. This distinction allows pain to be studied without dismissing its reality or reducing it to emotion alone. From a broader perspective, pain marks an important shift in the exploration of human senses. It introduces subjectivity without abandoning biology. It shows that sensing is not always about accurate representation. Sometimes it is about prioritization. The nervous system does not ask whether a signal is pleasant or elegant. It asks whether it matters. Pain matters because it changes behavior. It demands rest, avoidance, and care. It focuses attention on vulnerability. In doing so, it protects the organism over time, even if it disrupts comfort in the moment. Recognizing pain as a sense does not diminish its complexity. It places that complexity within a framework that can be understood, studied, and treated. It also reinforces a recurring theme. Some senses operate quietly in the background. Others speak loudly when necessary. Both serve the same goal: to keep the body intact. Pain may be the most difficult sense to appreciate, but it may also be one of the most honest. It does not exist to decorate experience. It exists to preserve it, and like every other sense, it works best when it does its job and then recedes, leaving the body safer than it was before. Up to this point, the senses may seem like separate instruments, each sending its own stream of information into the brain. Balance reports motion, proprioception reports position, temperature reports heat and cold, pain reports threat. Each system has its own receptors, pathways, and specialized role. But this is not how perception is actually experienced. The brain does not receive these signals as isolated messages and then line them up neatly for inspection. Instead, it weaves them together into a single, coherent account of what is happening, both inside the body and in the surrounding world. What you experience as perception is the result of that integration. This process is known as multisensory integration, and it is a central topic in cognitive neuroscience. Rather than treating the senses as independent channels, researchers study how information from different systems converges, interacts, and reshapes one another inside the brain. From the brain's perspective, the goal is not accuracy in any one sense. The goal is usefulness. Sensory signals arrive at different speeds. Touch and balance update rapidly. Vision takes slightly longer. Internal signals may change more slowly. If the brain waited for every system to report before acting, movement would feel sluggish and unstable. Instead, it combines incoming information dynamically, weighting signals based on context and reliability. This integration begins earlier than most people expect. It does not happen only in high-level brain areas associated with conscious thought. Signals from different senses start to interact in the brainstem and midbrain, shaping reflexes and posture long before awareness is involved. One well-studied example is the interaction between vision and balance. The vestibular system reports head movement and orientation. Vision reports motion across the visual field. Under normal conditions, these signals agree. When you turn your head, the world appears stable. When you move forward, the visual scene shifts in predictable ways. When they disagree, perception changes. Standing still inside a moving train can create the illusion that you are moving when the adjacent train pulls away. Your eyes report motion, while your vestibular system reports stillness. The brain resolves the conflict by favoring vision, and the sensation of movement emerges despite no actual change in position. This is not a mistake, it is a practical decision. Vision often provides the most reliable information about large-scale motion in everyday environments. The brain has learned this through experience. When visual cues strongly suggest movement, they are given greater weight than vestibular cues that may be ambiguous or noisy. Touch also participates in this integration. Light contact with a stable surface can dramatically improve balance. Even a fingertip resting against a wall provides enough tactile information to reduce sway. The pressure itself is minimal. The informational value is high. The brain uses that touch signal to recalibrate posture, combining it with vestibular and proprioceptive input to maintain stability. Again, no single sense is in charge. Each contributes according to context. Multisensory integration is also evident in how objects are perceived. The shape of an object is not purely visual. It is informed by touch, proprioception, and expectation. Close your eyes and handle an object, and the brain constructs a spatial representation using internal feedback from muscles and joints. Open your eyes, and vision updates that representation seamlessly. These processes are so smooth that their complexity is easy to miss. Neuroscience research has identified regions of the brain where multisensory integration is particularly strong. Areas of the parietal cortex, for example, combine visual, tactile, and proprioceptive information to support spatial awareness and movement planning. Activity in these regions reflects the combined state of the body rather than any single sensory input. Importantly, integration is not static. The brain continuously adjusts how much it trusts each sense. In low light, vision becomes less reliable, and proprioception and touch gain influence. On unstable ground, vestibular input becomes more important. When pain signals are strong, they can override other sensory priorities entirely. This flexibility is essential for survival. It also explains why sensory experiences can vary between individuals and situations. Perception is not a direct readout of the world. It is an inference based on multiple sources of information. When those sources shift in reliability, perception shifts with them. Cognitive neuroscience has shown that the brain often resolves uncertainty by combining sensory signals in a way that reduces overall error. If two senses provide similar information, the brain averages them. If one is noisy and the other is clear, the clearer signal dominates. This statistical approach to perception happens automatically, without calculation or awareness. The result feels effortless. This integrated view helps clarify why dividing perception into separate senses can be misleading. In lived experience, senses rarely operate alone. Vision is steadied by balance. Movement is guided by touch and proprioception. Internal state influences emotion and attention. Pain can suppress or amplify other sensory signals depending on urgency. The brain does not ask which sense is speaking, it asks what action is needed. This perspective also resolves apparent contradictions. For example, why can visual illusions influence balance, even when you know they are illusions? The answer is that knowledge does not override integration. The brain prioritizes incoming sensory data over abstract belief when maintaining posture and orientation. Similarly, why can light touch improve balance even when you're not consciously focusing on it? The sensory signal is integrated at levels below attention, contributing to stability regardless of awareness. Multisensory integration reveals that perception is something the brain constructs, not something it receives. Sensory systems provide fragments. The brain assembles them into a working model of reality that supports action. This does not make perception unreliable. It makes it adaptive. The model the brain builds is usually accurate enough because it is shaped by experience, feedback, and correction. When predictions fail, sensory input updates them. When signals conflict, weighting shifts. Over time, the system remains calibrated. Understanding integration also explains why adding new senses to the picture does not complicate perception. It clarifies it. Each additional sensory system provides another sort of information that can be weighed and combined. The brain is not overwhelmed by this richness. It is designed for it. Seen this way, the senses are not competitors. They are collaborators. Each one contributes a partial view. Together they produce something more stable and useful than any could alone. Perception emerges from their cooperation, not from their isolation. This shift in focus marks an important turning point. Rather than asking how many senses humans have, it becomes more meaningful to ask how. The brain integrates information across systems to guide behavior. The answer is not found in lists but in networks. The brain is not a collection of separate sensory modules waiting to be consulted. It is an active integrator, continuously combining signals, resolving ambiguity, and updating its understanding of the body and the world. Perception, in the end, is not something any single sense delivers. It is something the brain creates, moment by moment, from everything it knows. Time is not something the body can see or touch, yet it is something the body responds to constantly. Waking and sleeping, hunger rising and fading, energy building, then slowly declining. Even without clocks, calendars, or reminders, The body keeps its own sense of when things should happen. This raises a quiet question. If the body can track duration, sequence, and rhythm, does time function as a kind of sense? In everyday language, time feels abstract. It is measured with instruments rather than organs. It passes whether it is noticed or not. But from a biological perspective, the passage of time leaves traces everywhere. Cells divide on schedules. Hormones rise and fall in cycles. Attention, mood, and alertness follow predictable patterns across the day. These patterns are not learned socially, they are built in. The scientific study of biological timing is known as chronobiology, and it has revealed that the body contains multiple internal clocks. These clocks do not tell time in minutes or hours. They track cycles, rhythms, and intervals that matter for survival. At the center of this system is a small cluster of neurons in the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It sits deep within the hypothalamus and acts as a master coordinator of daily rhythms. Despite its small size, it has an outsized influence on behavior and physiology. The suprachiasmatic nucleus receives information directly from the eyes, not about images, but about light levels. This allows it to align the body's internal rhythms with the external day-night cycle. When light enters the eyes in the morning, it helps reset the clock. When darkness arrives, different signals take over. This system governs circadian rhythms, cycles that repeat roughly every day. Sleep and wake timing is the most obvious example, but it is far from the only one. Body temperature follows a daily pattern. Hormone release does as well. Cognitive performance, reaction time, and emotional regulation all fluctuate in predictable ways across the 24-hour cycle. What makes this especially interesting is that these rhythms persist even in the absence of external cues. People kept in constant darkness still show regular cycles of sleep, temperature, and hormone release. The timing may drift slightly, but the rhythm remains. This persistence demonstrates that the body is not merely reacting to the environment, it is actively keeping time. In that sense, the body senses duration. Beyond daily rhythms, the nervous system also tracks shorter intervals. Movements require precise timing. Speech depends on millisecond-level coordination. Music relies on rhythm perception. The brain can detect regularity and deviation in timing with remarkable sensitivity. Neuroscience research suggests that time perception does not rely on a single clock, but on distributed networks that measure change. Some systems track fast intervals, others track longer patterns. The experience of time emerges from how these systems interact. Internal signals play a key role in this process. Heartbeat, breathing, and neural oscillations provide repeating patterns that the brain can use as reference points. Changes in these rhythms alter the experience of time. When heart rate increases, time often feels compressed. During slow, regular breathing, time may feel expanded. Sleep research has shown how deeply timing is embedded in physiology. Disrupt circadian rhythms, and multiple systems begin to suffer. Sleep becomes fragmented. Metabolism shifts. Mood regulation becomes harder. Long-term disruption has been linked to increased risk of illness, demonstrating that timing is not a convenience. It is a regulatory necessity. This is why jet lag feels so disorienting. The body's internal clocks are out of sync with the external world. Hunger appears at odd hours. Alertness arrives at inconvenient times. The problem is not simply tiredness. It is sensory mismatch. Internal time signals no longer align with environmental cues. From this perspective, time sensing resembles other sensory systems already discussed. It involves specialized biological mechanisms, It relies on regular input and feedback. It guides behavior automatically, and it operates largely outside conscious awareness. Time does not feel like a sense because it does not have a distinct sensation attached to it. There is no color of time, no sound of time, no texture of time. Instead, there is timing, there is rhythm, there is sequence. The body knows when something is too fast, too slow, too early, or too late. That knowledge shapes movement, attention, and rest. Even pain perception is influenced by timing. Sharp pain arrives quickly. Dull pain lingers. The brain interprets not just what is happening, but how it unfolds over time. Timing carries meaning. Seen this way, time becomes another dimension the body monitors continuously. Not as a measured quantity, but as a pattern of change. The nervous system is tuned to regularity. When rhythms break, it responds. This tuning is not optional. Organisms that cannot track time struggle to coordinate behavior with the environment. Feeding, reproduction, and rest all depend on timing. Evolution has favored systems that anticipate rather than merely react. The idea of time as a sense may feel unfamiliar, but it fits the broader pattern. Sensory systems are not defined by vivid experience. They're defined by detection, prediction, and regulation. Time sensing does all three. It detects change through internal rhythms, it predicts what should happen next, and it regulates behavior accordingly. Extending the idea of sensing into duration rather than space shifts the focus again. Perception is not only about where things are or what they are like, it is also about when things happen. The body does not drift through time blindly. It keeps track, quietly, persistently, and like so many other sensory systems, it does its best work when it does not need to be noticed at all. When most people think about chemical sensing, two experiences come to mind: taste and smell, flavors on the tongue, scents in the air. Both are vivid, immediate, and easy to notice. They announce themselves clearly, which makes them feel like the complete story. They are not. Chemical sensing extends far beyond the nose and mouth. In fact, some of the most important chemical senses in the human body never produce a taste or a smell at all. They work continuously, quietly monitoring the internal environment and adjusting vital functions without asking for attention. Every moment the body is sampling its own chemistry. Specialized receptors known as chemoreceptors are distributed throughout the nervous system and circulatory system. Their job is to detect specific molecules and chemical conditions that matter for survival. Oxygen levels, carbon dioxide concentration, acidity of the blood, nutrient availability. These signals are not optional information, they are essential. One of the clearest examples of this system in action is breathing. Breathing does not occur simply because the lungs move. It is regulated by chemical feedback. Central chemoreceptors in the brain monitor carbon dioxide levels in the blood and surrounding fluid. When carbon dioxide rises, these receptors increase their activity. That activity stimulates breathing. When levels fall, breathing slows. This process happens automatically. It does not wait for conscious awareness. Even during deep sleep, breathing adjusts in response to chemical signals with remarkable precision. Peripheral chemoreceptors, located in blood vessels near the heart and neck, provide additional information. They are especially sensitive to oxygen levels in the blood. When oxygen drops below a certain range, these receptors send urgent signals to the brainstem, prompting deeper or faster breaths. This system is so finely tuned that small changes in blood chemistry can alter breathing within seconds. The result is a feedback loop that maintains stable oxygen and carbon dioxide levels, even as activity and demand change. Respiratory physiology research has shown that it is carbon dioxide, not oxygen, that primarily drives breathing under normal conditions. Oxygen levels can vary slightly without immediate effect. Carbon dioxide accumulation, however, triggers a rapid response. This may feel counterintuitive, but it reflects the body's priority on maintaining chemical balance. Metabolism is regulated in a similar way. Chemical sensors monitor glucose levels, hormones, and other metabolites circulating in the blood. These signals influence hunger, energy use, and storage. When glucose levels fall, hormonal signals promote eating. When levels rise, storage pathways are activated. All of this is guided by chemical detection rather than conscious calculation. Taste and smell still play important roles, but they operate at the interface with the external world. They help evaluate food before it enters the body. Internal chemoreceptors take over once substances are inside, monitoring what is actually happening rather than what is expected. This division of labor is efficient. External chemical sensing helps with choice. Internal chemical sensing helps with regulation. Physiology and medical research rely heavily on understanding these systems. Disorders of breathing, metabolism, and acid-base balance are often traced to disruptions in chemoreceptor function or signaling pathways. Conditions such as sleep apnea, metabolic syndrome, and certain respiratory illnesses involve failures in chemical sensing rather than mechanical function. The importance of these systems becomes especially clear when they are impaired. People with reduced sensitivity to carbon dioxide may not increase breathing adequately, leading to dangerous imbalances. Conversely, heightened sensitivity can cause breathlessness or panic, even when oxygen levels are normal. These reactions are not psychological quirks. They are sensory responses to chemical information. Chemical sensing also operates within the digestive system. Receptors detect nutrient content, acidity, and irritation. This information shapes digestion, absorption, and appetite. It influences how quickly food moves through the system and how efficiently nutrients are extracted. Again, awareness is not required. These processes unfold regardless of attention. What makes chemical sensing easy to overlook is its consistency. Unlike smell, which can fade through adaptation, internal chemical monitoring remains vigilant. It does not grow bored. It does not tune out. The cost of missing a chemical imbalance is too high. From a scientific perspective, there is no ambiguity about the sensory nature of these systems. They have specialized receptors. They detect specific chemical stimuli. They convert those detections into neural or hormonal signals. They guide behavior and physiology predictably. They simply operate in a register that does not feel like sensation. In fact, many people only become aware of chemical sensing during extremes: breathlessness during exertion, air hunger when holding breath, the discomfort of metabolic imbalance. These moments are the body raising the volume on signals that are normally kept quiet. Evolutionarily, this makes sense. A system that constantly demanded attention would interfere with other tasks. Chemical sensing works best when it remains subtle, intervening forcefully only when necessary. This quiet efficiency highlights a broader theme. Sensation is not defined by vivid experience. It is defined by information flow and regulation. The body is not waiting for the environment to announce danger or opportunity through obvious cues. It is actively sampling, comparing, and adjusting from within. Chemical sensing exemplifies this perfectly. It sustains breathing. It stabilizes metabolism. It supports life moment by moment without ever forming a clear sensory impression. The nose and tongue may introduce the chemical world. But the most important chemical conversations happen far from awareness, and they never stop. Sensing does not stop at nerves. Long before pain appears, before fever rises, before fatigue settles in, another system is already detecting that something is wrong. It does not wait for conscious awareness. It does not rely on the brain to interpret signals in the usual way. It operates at the level of cells and molecules, constantly surveying the body for signs of danger. This system is the immune system, and it functions as one of the most extensive sensing networks the body possesses. Rather than being a single organ, the immune system is distributed throughout the body. Immune cells circulate in the blood, reside in tissues, line organs, and patrol boundaries where the outside world meets the inside. Their primary task is not attack, it is detection. Every immune response begins with sensing. Immune cells are equipped with receptors that recognize specific patterns. Some of these patterns belong to pathogens such as bacteria or viruses. Others signal damage, stress, or abnormal behavior in the body's own cells. These receptors do not identify threats by sight or sound. They identify them chemically and structurally. A bacterium does not need to be seen to be recognized. It carries molecular signatures that immune cells are tuned to detect. Viral infection alters the internal chemistry of infected cells in ways that immune surveillance can sense. Even cells that begin to behave abnormally, such as those becoming cancerous, can trigger immune detection through changes in surface markers or internal signals. In this way, the immune system is continuously sampling the internal environment, looking for deviations from normal patterns. Immunology research has shown that immune cells distinguish between self and non-self not through a single rule, but through layered sensing. They detect foreign molecules, signs of tissue damage, and context signals that indicate whether a response is appropriate. This prevents constant overreaction while allowing rapid mobilization when real threats appear. This process is often described as immune surveillance, and the term is accurate. Like a sensory system, it involves detection, discrimination, and response. What makes immune sensing especially interesting in the context of sensation is that it operates largely without neurons. While the nervous system and immune system communicate extensively, immune detection does not require nerve fibers to function. Individual cells sense their surroundings directly. This challenges the idea that sensation must involve nerves or the brain. If sensation is defined as the detection of meaningful information that guides response, immune sensing fits comfortably within that definition. When immune cells detect a threat, they release chemical signals known as cytokines. These signals coordinate responses across the immune network, recruiting additional cells and adjusting behavior. Some of these signals also reach the brain, altering mood, energy, and motivation. The familiar feeling of sickness is a result of this communication. Fatigue, loss of appetite, and reduced motivation during illness are not side effects. They are regulated responses driven by immune signals. The body is being instructed to rest, conserve energy, and focus resources on defense and repair. This is sensory information shaping behavior, even though the original detection occurred far from awareness. Biomedical science institutions studying immunology have mapped these pathways in detail. Research has shown how immune signals influence sleep, temperature regulation, and even cognitive function. Fever, for example, is a coordinated response triggered by immune detection of infection. Temperature is adjusted deliberately to create conditions less favorable for pathogens. This coordination mirrors other sensory systems. Detection leads to interpretation. Interpretation leads to action. The immune system also demonstrates how sensing can occur at multiple scales simultaneously. A single immune cell detects molecular changes. Groups of cells integrate signals across tissues. The body as a whole responds through systemic changes in behavior and physiology. Importantly, immune sensing is not always associated with discomfort. Much of it happens quietly. Minor infections are cleared without noticeable symptoms. Damaged cells are removed and replaced without conscious involvement. The immune system is active even when health feels stable. This parallels other sensory systems discussed earlier. The most effective sensing often happens without being noticed. Immune sensing also adapts over time. Through exposure and learning, immune responses become more targeted. This adaptive aspect does not negate its sensory role, it enhances it. Experience refines detection, just as repeated exposure refines perception in other systems. From an evolutionary perspective, immune sensing is ancient. Variations of this system exist across multicellular life. Long before complex nervous systems evolved, organisms needed ways to detect internal threats. Chemical and cellular sensing provided that solution. Recognizing immune function as a form of sensing broadens the concept of perception beyond the nervous system. It suggests that the body gathers information through multiple parallel networks, not all of which report to consciousness in the same way. This does not mean the immune system replaces traditional senses, it complements them. Vision detects approaching danger, pain signals injury, immune sensing detects invasion and internal breakdown. Each operates on different timescales and with different priorities. Together they create a layered defense and monitoring system that supports survival. Viewing the immune system through this lens also reframes the experience of illness. Symptoms are not merely failures or malfunctions. They are signals generated by a sensory network responding to detected threats. The discomfort has purpose, even when it is unpleasant. This perspective does not romanticize illness. It clarifies it. The immune system senses when the body is no longer operating within safe parameters. It initiates responses aimed at restoring balance. Sometimes those responses overshoot, sometimes they misfire, but the underlying process is still one of detection and regulation. By including immune sensing in the discussion of human senses, the idea of sensation expands again. Sensing is no longer confined to conscious experience or neural pathways. It becomes a broader biological principle. The body is not a passive object waiting to be informed by the world. It is an active system, continuously scanning for information at every level of organization. Cells sense, tissues sense, organs sense. The immune system is one of the clearest examples of this deeper layer of perception. It listens for chemical whispers and molecular signatures that would otherwise go unnoticed, and in doing so, it protects the whole organism long before awareness ever has a chance to respond. Long before sensation becomes something that can be named or remembered, it is already at work. Before eyes open, before ears respond to sound, before there is any possibility of awareness, developing organisms are sensing their environment and responding to it. Sensing begins early, much earlier than experience. From the very first stages of development, cells respond to information, not information in the form of sights or sounds, but chemical gradients, mechanical forces, and positional cues that guide growth and organization. These signals tell cells where they are, what they should become, and how they should behave in relation to their neighbors. Developmental biology has revealed that embryos are not built from a fixed blueprint alone. They are shaped through continuous feedback. Cells release chemical signals. Other cells detect those signals and respond. Structures emerge not because every detail is pre-written, but because sensing and response unfold together. One of the most important forms of early sensing is chemical signaling. Developing tissues produce gradients of signaling molecules that vary across space. Cells detect the concentration of these molecules and use that information to determine their fate. A small difference in chemical exposure can mean the difference between becoming nerve tissue, muscle, or skin. This process is known as pattern formation, and it depends entirely on the ability of cells to sense their chemical environment. Without detection, there is no organization. Without organization, there is no functional body. Mechanical cues also play a role. As tissues grow and fold, cells experience forces such as stretch, compression, and pressure. These forces are not incidental. Cells respond to them. They adjust their shape, orientation, and behavior based on mechanical feedback. In this way, developing organisms sense not only chemical information, but physical context. Where a cell sits, how crowded it is, and how much tension it experiences all influence how development proceeds. Positional information is another key element. Cells need to know where they are within the larger structure. This is not achieved through a map or a coordinate system, but through local sensing. Cells compare signals from their surroundings and infer relative position. The result is a coordinated body plan emerging from local interactions. Developmental biology research has shown that disrupting these sensory cues leads to profound changes. Alter-chemical gradients and structures form in the wrong places. Change mechanical forces, and tissues fail to organize correctly. Development is not simply construction. It is sensing-guided assembly. As the nervous system begins to form, sensory input takes on an additional role. Early neural activity shapes how circuits are wired. Even before birth, spontaneous patterns of neural firing occur, helping establish connections between neurons. These patterns are influenced by sensory feedback from the developing body. For example, movements in the womb generate proprioceptive input that helps calibrate motor circuits. Touch receptors respond to contact with surrounding tissues. Vestibular signals begin to provide information about motion. None of this is consciously experienced, yet it plays a role in shaping the nervous system. This early sensory activity helps refine neural wiring. Connections that are used frequently are strengthened. Those that are not are weakened or removed. The result is a nervous system tuned to the body it inhabits and the environment it expects to encounter. This process continues after birth. Sensory input during early life has a disproportionate influence on development. Vision, hearing, touch, and movement all contribute to how neural circuits mature. When sensory input is absent or altered during critical periods, long-term changes can result. Classic studies in neuroscience demonstrated that depriving animals of normal visual input early in life permanently altered the structure and function of visual regions in the brain. These findings showed that sensory experience does not merely inform perception. It helps build the machinery that makes perception possible. Importantly, this shaping occurs long before conscious memory or awareness. The brain is learning how to sense before the mind knows it exists. This challenges the idea that sensing is something that begins with experience. Instead, experience builds upon sensing that is already underway. The body and brain are prepared in advance, tuned through early feedback to respond effectively once awareness emerges. The influence of early sensory input is not limited to perception. It affects emotion, regulation, and behavior. Touch, for instance, plays a crucial role in early development. Gentle contact influences stress responses, growth, and social bonding. These effects are mediated through sensory pathways long before they can be described or reflected upon. Even the immune system participates in developmental sensing. Early exposure to certain signals helps calibrate immune responses, shaping how the body distinguishes between harmless and harmful stimuli later in life. Once again, sensing guides adaptation over time. From a lifespan perspective, this means that sensing is not a static ability acquired at a particular moment. It is a continuous process that begins before birth and evolves throughout life. Each stage builds on the previous one, layering experience onto an existing sensory foundation. This deep time view also reframes the idea of learning. Learning is not just about acquiring knowledge. It is about adjusting sensory systems to better detect, interpret, and respond to information. The earliest lessons are not taught, they are sensed. Recognizing sensing as a developmental process expands the concept beyond moment-to-moment perception. It shows that sensation is involved in building the organism itself. The body does not wait until it is finished to begin interacting with the world. Interaction is how it finishes. This perspective helps unify many of the systems discussed so far. Balance, proprioception, internal sensing, and even immune detection all emerge through developmental processes guided by sensory feedback. They are not bolted on at the end. They are woven into the body as it forms. It also underscores why awareness is not a requirement for sensing. The most formative sensory influences occur before awareness is even possible. Conscious experience rides on top of systems shaped through earlier, quieter interactions. Developmental sensing demonstrates that perception is not merely about interpreting the world. It is about becoming a body capable of interpretation in the first place. By the time awareness arrives, the groundwork has already been laid. The senses are in place, calibrated through countless interactions that left no memories but shaped everything that followed. Sensing in this view is not something that begins when life becomes conscious. It is something life does from the very start, and it never really stops. When the human senses are viewed in isolation, they can seem oddly assorted. Some feel vivid and dominant, others operate quietly in the background. Some deliver rich detail, others simply keep the body functioning. Evolution provides the context that makes sense of this uneven landscape. Sensory systems are not designed for completeness or elegance. They are shaped by usefulness. From an evolutionary perspective, a sense exists because it improves survival or reproduction in a particular environment. If detecting a certain kind of information helps an organism stay alive long enough to pass on its genes, that ability is favored. If it does not, it tends to fade or never appear at all. This is the core logic of natural selection. Traits that confer advantage persist. Traits that do not gradually disappear. Seen this way, the diversity of human senses reflects a long history of adaptation. Each sensory system answers a specific problem faced by ancestors over millions of years. Balance helped bodies move without falling. Proprioception enabled coordinated movement. Internal sensing maintained chemical stability. Pain discouraged dangerous behavior. None of these emerged by chance. They emerged because organisms that possessed them were more likely to survive. Evolutionary biology frameworks emphasize that there is no single ideal sensory system. There is only what works well enough in a given context. Different environments favor different kinds of information. Aquatic animals evolved sensors tuned to pressure waves and water chemistry. Nocturnal animals often rely more heavily on sound and smell than vision. Flying animals require exceptionally precise balance and spatial orientation. Humans are no exception. Human sensory abilities reflect the environments in which early hominins lived. Vision is well developed for detecting detail at a distance, particularly in daylight. This supported activities such as foraging, social interaction, and tool use. Color vision helped distinguish ripe fruit from unripe. Depth perception aided movement through complex terrain. Hearing evolved to detect subtle changes in sound direction and timing, supporting communication and awareness of nearby activity. Smell and taste helped evaluate food safety and quality. Touch provided information about texture, temperature, and threat. At the same time, humans did not evolve extreme versions of every sense. Compared to many animals, human smell is relatively modest. Dogs, for example, possess a vastly larger repertoire of olfactory receptors, allowing them to detect concentrations of certain chemicals that are effectively invisible to humans. For a dog, smell is a dominant sense. For humans, it is informative but secondary. Similarly, some animals can detect magnetic fields, electric currents, or polarized light. Birds use magnetic cues to navigate long distances. Certain fish sense electrical fields produced by other organisms. Bees perceive patterns in light that humans cannot see. These senses feel exotic only because humans do not possess them. Their existence reinforces an important point. The human sensory set is not a universal template. It is one solution among many. Even within the human lineage, sensory systems have changed over time. As lifestyles shifted, so did sensory demands. The transition from arboreal to terrestrial movement placed new emphasis on balance and proprioception. Tool use increased the importance of fine touch and motor control. Social complexity favored sensory cues related to facial expression, vocal tone, and body language. Evolution also explains why some senses feel redundant or overlapping. Sensory systems often provide backup. Vision, balance, and proprioception all contribute to spatial orientation. If one system becomes unreliable, others can compensate. This redundancy improves resilience. An organism that relies on a single channel of information is vulnerable if that channel fails. This redundancy is not inefficiency, it is insurance. Natural selection also shapes how sensory information is prioritized. Some signals demand immediate response. Pain and sudden loss of balance trigger rapid reactions. Others support long-term regulation. Internal chemical sensing adjusts behavior gradually. Time sensing aligns activity with environmental cycles. The brain reflects these priorities. Sensory signals that matter most for survival gain privileged access to attention and action systems. Signals that matter for fine discrimination or comfort may be processed more quietly. Evolutionary theory also helps explain why sensory systems blend into emotion and motivation. From a survival standpoint, information is only useful if it influences behavior. A sensory signal that does not motivate response is unlikely to be favored. This is why pain feels unpleasant. This is why hunger feels compelling. This is why internal imbalance generates discomfort. These experiences are not design flaws, they are evolved features. Comparing human senses to those of other organisms highlights how flexible sensory evolution can be. Some animals have sacrificed one sense to enhance another. Cave-dwelling species often lose vision entirely, redirecting resources to touch or chemical sensing. Predators may prioritize motion detection over color discrimination. Prey animals may favor wide-field vision over detail. Humans occupy a middle ground. The human sensory profile supports versatility rather than specialization. Humans are not the fastest, strongest, or most perceptive in any single domain. Instead, they combine moderately strong sensory abilities with learning, memory, and social communication. This balance has consequences. Human senses are highly adaptable. Training can improve sensitivity. Experience can reshape perception. Cultural practices can alter how sensory information is interpreted. Evolution provided the foundation. Learning builds on it. Evolution also clarifies why some senses feel less obvious than others. Senses that support regulation rather than exploration do not need to intrude into awareness. Their success is measured by stability, not vividness. Internal sensing and immune detection work best when they prevent problems quietly, rather than announce them loudly. When these systems do intrude, it is usually because something has gone wrong. From an evolutionary standpoint, this is efficient. Awareness is a limited resource. Flooding it with information that does not require action would be costly. Natural selection favors sensory systems that deliver the right information at the right level of prominence. This perspective reframes the idea of the 5 senses. That list reflects the senses most useful for describing experience, not the senses most critical for survival. It reflects cultural storytelling, not evolutionary history. Evolutionary biology does not ask how many senses an organism has. It asks what information the organism needs. The answer varies across species and environments. Humans happen to need a particular combination of external and internal sensing to function effectively in their ecological niche. The result is a sensory system that feels intuitive from the inside, yet complex when examined closely. Understanding this evolutionary backdrop removes the temptation to rank senses as more or less important based on how they feel. Importance is context-dependent. Balance matters more when moving. Chemical sensing matters more when regulating physiology. Pain matters more when tissue is threatened. Each sense is a solution to a specific problem. Seen through this lens, the diversity of human senses stops feeling excessive or confusing. It becomes a record of challenges faced and solved over deep time. Each sensory system carries the imprint of environments, behaviors, and constraints that shaped it. The body does not sense everything. It senses what matters. Evolution ensures that what matters most tends to persist. And that, more than any tidy list, explains why the human sensory world looks the way it does today. No two people experience the world in exactly the same way. Even when standing side by side looking at the same scene, listening to the same sounds and touching the same surface, perception can differ in subtle and sometimes surprising ways. This variation is not a flaw in the sensory system. It is one of its defining features. Human sensing is not fixed at birth. It is shaped by biology, experience, and time. One source of difference lies in genetics. Sensory receptors are built from proteins encoded by genes, and small variations in those genes can change how receptors respond. In vision, for example, slight differences in the proteins that detect light affect color perception. Some people distinguish fine color differences easily. Others experience a narrower range, even though their vision functions well in everyday life. Smell provides an even clearer illustration. Humans possess hundreds of different olfactory receptor genes, and not all of them are active in every individual. This means that certain scents can be vivid and distinctive to one person, while remaining faint or unremarkable to another. These differences are inherited, and they shape sensory experience quietly from the start. Taste also varies genetically. Sensitivity to bitterness differs widely, influenced by specific receptor variants. Foods that taste mildly bitter to some can be overwhelmingly intense to others. Preferences often follow naturally from these differences, giving rise to the impression that taste is subjective, when in fact it is partly biological. Genetics sets the initial conditions, but it does not determine the final outcome. The nervous system is remarkably adaptable. A property known as plasticity allows sensory systems to change with use, learning, and experience. Pathways that are used frequently become more efficient. Those that are neglected weaken. Over time, perception is shaped by what the body and brain repeatedly encounter. This is especially clear in touch and movement. Musicians develop enhanced sensitivity in the fingers they use most. Athletes refine proprioceptive accuracy in movements specific to their sport. These changes are measurable in the brain, where regions devoted to frequently used sensory inputs expand and reorganize. Vision shows similar flexibility. Individuals who spend long hours reading fine text develop different visual sensitivities than those who work primarily with large-scale spatial information. Experience tunes perception toward what matters most in daily life. Hearing adapts as well. Exposure to certain sound patterns improves the ability to detect them. Language learning provides a striking example. Infants can initially distinguish a wide range of speech sounds from many languages. Over time, sensitivity narrows to the sounds that are relevant in their linguistic environment. This is not loss, it is specialization. Neuroscience research has shown that these changes occur because sensory cortices are not static maps. They are dynamic networks that reorganize based on input. Neurons that fire together strengthen their connections. Patterns that repeat become easier to detect. This principle applies across sensory systems. Psychology research adds another layer. Attention, expectation, and learning influence how sensory information is interpreted. The same stimulus can be perceived differently depending on context. A sound may seem loud in a quiet room and unremarkable in a noisy one. A mild sensation may feel intense if it is unexpected. Past experience also shapes perception. Familiar sensations are processed more efficiently and often feel less salient. Novel sensations stand out. This is why unfamiliar environments can feel overwhelming at first and then gradually become comfortable. The sensory input has not changed. The brain's response has. Emotional state plays a role as well. Stress can heighten sensitivity to certain signals, particularly those related to threat or discomfort. Calm states often dampen these signals. This modulation reflects the brain's attempt to prioritize information based on perceived need. Pain perception illustrates this clearly. Two people with similar injuries may report very different levels of pain. Genetics, prior experience, attention, and emotional context all contribute. This does not make pain unreal or arbitrary. It shows that sensory systems are integrated with motivation and regulation. Internal sensing also varies between individuals. Some people are more attuned to signals from within the body. They notice changes in heartbeat, breathing, or hunger early. Others are less aware until signals become strong. Research has shown that these differences can influence emotional awareness and decision-making. Again, there is no ideal level. High sensitivity can be useful in some contexts and burdensome in others. Low sensitivity can support stability, but may delay response to internal imbalance. Variation allows flexibility across populations. Learning and culture further shape sensory experience. Cultural practices influence how attention is directed. Some cultures emphasize subtle sensory cues in food, music, or movement. Others prioritize different aspects of experience. Over time, these emphases train perception. This helps explain why sensory worlds feel personal. The brain is not merely detecting signals, it is interpreting them through a lens shaped by biology and history. Importantly, variation in sensory experience does not mean that reality itself is different for each person. The underlying stimuli are the same. The differences lie in how information is sampled, weighted, and integrated. Perception is a negotiation between the world and the nervous system. This negotiation continues throughout life. Aging brings changes in sensory receptors and neural processing. Some sensitivities decline, others remain stable. Experience can compensate for certain losses, allowing older individuals to function effectively despite changes in raw input. Injury and illness can also alter sensory experience. Loss of one sense often leads to increased reliance on others. The brain reallocates resources, strengthening remaining pathways. This adaptability is one of the nervous system's most powerful features. Understanding individual differences in sensing humanizes sensory science. It moves the discussion away from abstract systems and toward lived experience. It explains why people may disagree about what feels loud, bright, painful, or pleasant, without implying that anyone is mistaken. These differences are not noise in the system, they are part of its design. From an evolutionary perspective, variation is valuable. Populations with diverse sensory profiles are more resilient. Different individuals may detect different aspects of the environment, contributing to collective success. Uniformity would be fragile. Recognizing this variation also encourages a more generous view of perception. What feels obvious to one person may not be to another. What feels overwhelming to one may feel subtle to someone else. These differences reflect real differences in sensory processing, not weakness or exaggeration. The senses are shared in structure but personal in expression. This personal dimension does not undermine the scientific understanding of sensation. It enriches it. Sensory systems are not rigid instruments. They are living processes, shaped by genes, refined by experience, and adjusted continually to meet changing demands. By acknowledging that people sense differently, the study of sensation becomes more than a catalogue of mechanisms. It becomes a study of how biology and experience intertwine to produce the richness of human perception. The world is the same. The ways of sensing it are many. And that diversity is not a complication to be solved. It is a feature to be understood. Sleep often feels like a complete withdrawal from the world. Eyes close, muscles relax, awareness fades. From the inside, it can seem as though sensing has been switched off, replaced by stillness and absence. In reality, the senses never fully disengage. Even in the deepest stages of sleep, the brain continues to receive, process, and filter sensory information. The difference is not whether sensing occurs, but how it is managed. Sleep changes the rules. It does not silence the system. Neuroscience research has shown that sensory pathways remain active throughout sleep. Sounds still reach the ears. Pressure is still detected by the skin. Internal signals continue to flow. The sleeping brain is not isolated from the body or environment. It is selectively attentive. This selectivity is known as sensory gating. Sensory gating refers to the brain's ability to regulate which sensory signals are allowed to influence processing and which are dampened or ignored. During wakefulness, this system helps prevent overload, allowing attention to focus on what matters. During sleep, it becomes even more selective. Some signals are reduced dramatically, others are preserved or even heightened. For example, during sleep, the brain becomes less responsive to repetitive or non-threatening stimuli. A constant background noise may fade entirely. Pressure from bedding is ignored. These signals are still detected at the receptor level, but their impact on higher brain regions is suppressed. At the same time, signals that indicate potential danger remain capable of breaking through. A sudden loud sound, a sharp pain, or difficulty breathing can trigger arousal almost instantly. The sensory system is still on watch, prioritizing safety over rest when necessary. This balance is essential. Sleep would be impossible if every minor sensation demanded attention. It would be dangerous if no sensation could interrupt rest. Sensory gating solves this problem by adjusting sensitivity rather than eliminating input. Sleep science has explored how this gating changes across different stages of sleep. In lighter stages, the brain remains relatively responsive to external cues. In deeper stages, responsiveness decreases but does not vanish. Certain pathways remain ready to activate. The brainstem plays a key role in this process. It acts as a gatekeeper, regulating the flow of sensory information to higher brain regions. This regulation is dynamic, shifting throughout the night as sleep cycles progress. Internal sensing continues uninterrupted. Breathing, heart rate, temperature, and chemical balance are monitored continuously. In fact, some regulatory processes are enhanced during sleep. Growth hormone release increases. Tissue repair accelerates. Immune activity shifts. These processes depend on reliable sensory feedback. The body must know when to adjust breathing, when to alter circulation, when to wake if conditions become unsafe. Sleep is not a break from regulation. It is a different mode of regulation. Dreaming offers a particularly intriguing window into sensory processing during sleep. During dreams, the brain generates vivid sensory experiences in the absence of external input. Visual scenes appear. Sounds are heard. Movement is felt. All of this is constructed internally. This demonstrates an important point. Sensory experience does not require sensory input in the moment. It requires sensory machinery. The same neural circuits that process sensation during wakefulness can be activated internally during sleep, producing convincing experiences without signals from the outside world. At the same time, external sensory input can still influence dreams. Sounds in the environment may be incorporated into dream narratives. Physical sensations can shape dream content. The boundary between internal and external sensing remains porous. Unconscious states beyond sleep reveal similar patterns. During anesthesia, sensory processing is altered but not eliminated. Certain sensory signals still reach the brain, even when awareness is absent. The distinction between consciousness and sensation becomes especially clear in these states. Clinical research has shown that patients under anesthesia may still exhibit neural responses to sound or touch. Despite having no memory of the experience, sensory detection persists. Awareness does not. This separation reinforces a central theme. Sensing and consciousness are related but distinct. Sensory systems can operate independently of awareness, adjusting behavior and physiology without producing experience. Sleep highlights this distinction elegantly. During rest, the brain reallocates resources. Attention to the external world is reduced. Internal processes take priority. Repair, consolidation, and recalibration become the focus. Sensory systems support this shift by filtering information rather than shutting down. Memory consolidation during sleep relies on sensory processing as well. Experiences from the day are replayed and reorganized. Patterns of neural activity associated with sensory input are revisited, strengthened, or refined. This process helps stabilize learning and integrate new information. In this way, sleep uses sensory systems to improve future perception and action. The senses are not idle, they are being tuned. Rest and recovery depend on this quiet activity. Muscles repair, immune responses adjust, metabolic processes reset. All of this requires ongoing sensory feedback. The body must know its internal state in order to restore balance effectively. From a sensory perspective, sleep is not a passive state. It is an active reconfiguration. Sensory systems shift from outward monitoring to inward maintenance, from exploration to restoration. This shift aligns naturally with the idea that the most essential senses operate best when they remain unobtrusive. During sleep, their work becomes even quieter, yet no less important. The calm that accompanies sleep is not the absence of sensation. It is the presence of regulation without distraction. Understanding this helps explain why good sleep feels restorative. Sensory systems have had the opportunity to recalibrate without constant external demand. Signals have been filtered appropriately. Resources have been directed where they are needed most. Poor sleep disrupts this balance. Sensory gating becomes less effective. Internal regulation suffers. The body feels louder, less stable, more reactive. The difference is not in how much sensing occurs, but in how well it is managed. Sleep reveals the senses at their most subtle and disciplined, alert enough to protect, quiet enough to allow rest. In this state, the body demonstrates a remarkable capacity. It can remain informed without being disturbed. It can sense without demanding attention. That ability is not accidental. It is the result of sensory systems evolved not only to gather information, but to know when to step back. In sleep, sensing does not disappear. It becomes gentle. It is tempting to think of perception as a direct window onto reality. Light enters the eyes. Sound reaches the ears. Signals travel inward, and the world appears more or less as it is. From the inside, perception feels immediate and trustworthy. Cognitive science paints a subtler picture. Perception is not a copy of the world delivered to the mind. It is a construction, a best estimate assembled by the brain from incomplete, noisy, and sometimes conflicting sensory information. What is experienced is not raw input, but an interpretation shaped by context, expectation, and prior knowledge. This does not mean perception is unreliable in a careless way. It means it is efficient. Sensory systems sample only a fraction of the available information. The brain fills in gaps, smooths over ambiguity, and prioritizes what matters most for action. The result is a coherent experience that feels stable, even though the underlying data are fragmentary. One way cognitive scientists describe this process is through predictive perception. The brain is constantly generating expectations about what it is likely to encounter next. Incoming sensory signals are compared against those expectations. When they match, perception proceeds smoothly. When they do not, the model is updated. This predictive process operates continuously. It allows perception to be fast rather than perfect. Waiting for complete information would be too slow to support movement, balance, or survival. Acting on well-informed predictions is far more effective. Illusions provide a clear demonstration of this principle. Visual illusions, for example, do not occur because the eyes malfunction. They occur because the brain applies rules that usually work. Depth cues, shading, perspective, and contrast are interpreted according to assumptions that reflect typical environments. When those assumptions are violated in carefully designed images, perception follows the rules anyway. The illusion reveals the rule. A familiar example involves lines that appear different in length despite being identical. The brain interprets contextual cues as indicators of depth, adjusting perceived size accordingly. The error is not random, it is systematic. It reflects how perception normally succeeds in three-dimensional space. Auditory illusions work in similar ways. The perceived location or timing of sounds can be influenced by visual input or expectation. The brain integrates information across senses to produce a single experience, even when the data disagree. The experience feels unified because the brain values coherence. Touch and body perception are also subject to interpretation. The sense of limb position depends on proprioception, vision, and prior body maps. Under certain conditions, these signals can be manipulated, producing the feeling that a body part has moved or changed when it has not. Once again, the brain is not confused. It is resolving ambiguity using the information it has. These examples demonstrate an important limit of sensory accuracy. Sensory systems are not measuring instruments designed to report objective truth. They are biological tools designed to support action. Accuracy is defined relative to usefulness, not precision. This does not make perception arbitrary. It makes it adaptive. Most of the time, the brain's predictions are well calibrated. They reflect a lifetime of experience interacting with a stable environment. When conditions fall within expected ranges, perception is remarkably reliable. Objects appear solid, movement feels smooth, space feels continuous. Problems arise mainly in artificial or unusual conditions, where assumptions no longer apply. Laboratory illusions exploit these mismatches deliberately. They do not reveal a broken system. They reveal the shortcuts that make the system efficient. Cognitive science also emphasizes that perception is influenced by goals and attention. The same sensory input can be interpreted differently depending on what the brain is trying to accomplish. When searching for a friend in a crowd, faces stand out. When navigating a dark room, edges and obstacles take priority. Expectation shapes what is noticed and how it is interpreted. This is not bias in the moral sense, it is prioritization. Perception is also shaped by learning. Repeated exposure to certain patterns tunes sensory systems to detect them more easily. Musicians hear structure in sound that others miss. Experienced drivers notice subtle changes in road conditions. The world has not changed. The perceptual model has. This adaptability introduces another limit. Perception reflects history as much as reality. What is seen, heard, or felt depends partly on what has been seen, heard, or felt before. From a scientific standpoint, this means perception is always a negotiation. Sensory input provides constraints. The brain provides interpretation. Neither operates alone. Importantly, recognizing that perception is constructed does not imply that reality is unknowable. It implies that access to reality is mediated. The brain builds a working model that is good enough to guide behavior most of the time. That model can be tested, corrected, and refined through interaction. This is why action matters for perception. Movement generates new sensory input. Feedback confirms or challenges predictions. Over time, the brain stays calibrated by engaging with the world, not by passively observing it. This dynamic explains why perception often feels more reliable during action than during stillness. When moving, the brain can compare expectations against outcomes continuously. When isolated from feedback, interpretation becomes less constrained. It also explains why sensory disagreements can feel unsettling. When vision and balance conflict, or when internal signals contradict expectations, the brain struggles to reconcile the mismatch. Discomfort arises not because reality is strange, but because prediction has failed. Understanding these limits clarifies the role of the senses explored so far. Each sensory system contributes partial information. None provides a complete picture. Integration, prediction, and correction are what turn fragments into experience. Perception is not the sum of the senses. It is the process that binds them. This perspective encourages a more modest view of sensory certainty. What is experienced feels immediate and obvious, yet it is the result of layered processing. Confidence in perception is a feature of the system, not proof of accuracy. At the same time, this modesty does not require skepticism. The sensory model works because it is constantly tested. When errors occur, they are usually small and short-lived. When they matter, other systems intervene. Pain demands attention. Balance corrects posture. Internal sensing triggers regulation. The senses taken together form a self-correcting network. Perception versus reality is not a conflict, it is a relationship. Perception is the interface through which reality becomes actionable. It does not reveal everything, it reveals what is needed. This framing deepens understanding without undermining trust. The world does not dissolve into illusion. It remains stable because the brain's model is grounded in consistent interaction. Illusions remind us of limits, not failures. They show how perception depends on context, history, and purpose. They reveal the rules that normally keep experience coherent. By recognizing perception as construction rather than copying, the senses take on a new role. They are not reporters. They are contributors to a collaborative process that balances accuracy with efficiency. Reality is rich, complex, and indifferent to perception. The senses do not mirror it. They translate it. And that translation, though imperfect, is usually good enough to let a body move, survive, and understand its place in the world. Most of the senses described so far rarely announce themselves. They do not arrive as clear images, sounds, or sensations that demand attention. Instead, they shape everyday life quietly, influencing posture, mood, movement, and decisions without asking to be noticed. This is how sensing usually works when it is working well. Standing upright, for example, feels effortless. There is no conscious calculation involved. Balance, proprioception, and internal sensing collaborate continuously to keep the body aligned. Muscles adjust before instability becomes noticeable. The head remains level, vision stays steady. All of this happens while attention is elsewhere. Walking through a room offers a similar demonstration. Steps fall into rhythm without planning. Corners are navigated smoothly. Objects are avoided without being explicitly measured. The body negotiates space using a blend of sensory information that rarely reaches awareness. Posture throughout the day is guided in the same way. Small shifts in weight, tension, and alignment occur constantly. These adjustments prevent fatigue and strain. When posture is disrupted, discomfort appears. When posture is supported, the body fades into the background. Mood is also influenced by sensory systems that operate beneath notice. Internal sensing contributes to emotional tone by monitoring heart rate, breathing, and internal balance. A slow, steady rhythm often accompanies calm states. Rapid or irregular internal signals are associated with stress or unease. These sensations do not always present as specific feelings. They color experience subtly, shaping how situations are interpreted. Applied neuroscience research has shown that changing sensory input can influence mood directly. Gentle movement, steady breathing, or stable physical contact can shift internal signals in ways that promote calm. These effects do not require belief or intention. They reflect how sensory information feeds into regulation. Decision-making is similarly shaped. Choices often feel intuitive rather than calculated. That intuition is informed by bodily signals. Subtle changes in internal state influence preference, caution, and motivation. This does not mean decisions are irrational. It means they are informed by more than conscious reasoning. For example, Discomfort may encourage withdrawal from a situation before explicit reasons are identified. Ease may promote engagement. These responses are guided by sensory systems reporting internal conditions that matter for well-being. Health research has increasingly recognized the role of these invisible senses in long-term outcomes. Chronic stress, poor posture, disrupted sleep, and irregular breathing all alter sensory feedback. Over time, these changes can influence pain, mood, and resilience. Conversely, practices that support sensory regulation tend to improve stability. Regular movement maintains proprioceptive accuracy. Consistent sleep supports internal timing. Balanced breathing supports chemical sensing. None of these require constant attention. They work best when integrated into daily life. The reliability of these systems is easy to underestimate because they rarely fail dramatically. When they do fail, the impact is immediate and instructive. Loss of balance transforms simple movement into effort. Disruption of internal sensing can make the body feel unpredictable or loud. Chronic pain shifts attention inward relentlessly. These experiences highlight how much is normally handled quietly. What is striking is how little credit these systems receive when functioning properly. Vision and hearing dominate conversation because they produce clear experiences. Internal senses, by contrast, express themselves through absence. Absence of dizziness, absence of strain, absence of hunger at inappropriate times. This absence is not emptiness, it is success. Everyday routines depend on this success, sitting comfortably through a conversation, maintaining focus without discomfort, adjusting posture without distraction. Even the ability to ignore the body while thinking relies on sensory systems regulating conditions behind the scenes. Modern environments can challenge these systems in subtle ways. Prolonged sitting reduces proprioceptive feedback. Artificial lighting disrupts internal timing. Constant stimulation competes with sensory gating. Over time, the body may respond with fatigue, tension, or restlessness. Understanding invisible senses provides a framework for interpreting these responses without dramatizing them. Discomfort is not always a sign of damage. It is often a signal that sensory systems are being pushed outside familiar ranges. Small adjustments can restore balance. Movement reintroduces feedback. Regular rhythms support timing. Quiet environments allow gating to function properly. The body responds quickly when given appropriate input. This responsiveness reflects an underlying robustness. Sensory systems are designed to adapt. They adjust sensitivity based on use. They recalibrate when conditions change. This adaptability allows people to function across a wide range of environments and demands. At the same time, adaptability has limits. Ignoring sensory feedback for too long can lead to strain. Chronic misalignment between environment and sensory needs can accumulate. The body communicates these mismatches through subtle signals long before serious problems develop. Living well with invisible senses does not require constant monitoring. It requires occasional listening. This listening is not analytical, it is practical. Notice when movement feels constrained. Notice when rest feels incomplete. Notice when internal rhythms feel disrupted. These observations are not diagnostic. They are informative. Applied health research increasingly emphasizes this perspective. Interventions that support sensory regulation often improve outcomes across multiple domains. Addressing posture can reduce pain. Improving sleep can stabilize mood. Supporting breathing can influence stress responses. These effects are not mysterious. They reflect the interconnected nature of sensory systems. What emerges from this view is a more integrated understanding of daily life. The body is not a passive vehicle carrying the mind. It is an active sensing system, continuously shaping experience and behavior. Most of this shaping happens below awareness, which is precisely why it feels natural. The senses are not meant to be watched, they are meant to be trusted. This trust is not blind, it is earned through consistency. Day after day, sensory systems maintain balance, stability, and coordination without complaint. They intervene when necessary and step back when not. Recognizing their role does not require turning inward obsessively. It simply adds context. It explains why certain habits feel supportive and others draining. It clarifies why rest restores and why movement refreshes. Invisible senses do not ask to be admired, they ask to be allowed to do their work. When they are supported, life feels smoother. Decisions feel clearer. The body feels quieter. And that quiet is not emptiness. It is the sound of systems doing exactly what they evolved to do. By this point, the idea of human senses may feel very different from the tidy list most people learned early on. What began as 5 familiar gateways to the world has gradually expanded into something broader, quieter, and more intricate. Not a replacement of the old model, but a widening of the frame around it. The 5 senses still exist, they always have. Sight, hearing, smell, taste and touch remain central to how experience is described and shared. They dominate language, memory and attention because they are vivid and outward-facing. They are the senses most closely tied to conscious awareness. That is why the 5-sense model persists. It is not because science failed to move on, it is because the model is useful. It provides a simple way to organize experience, especially when teaching children or summarizing perception in everyday conversation. It aligns with what is easiest to notice and name. What it does not do is describe the full scope of how the body gathers information. Modern science does not reject the 5 senses. It places them within a much larger system, a system in which sensation is defined not by how it feels, but by how information is detected, transmitted, and used. Seen through this lens, sensing is not limited to surfaces. It extends inward. It includes balance, body position, internal chemistry, temperature regulation, pain detection, immune surveillance, timing, and rhythm. These systems operate continuously, shaping behavior and physiology, whether or not awareness is involved. This broader framework does not complicate understanding. It simplifies it. Instead of asking how many senses humans have, the more meaningful question becomes what kinds of information the body needs in order to function. The answer is necessarily diverse. Bodies must know where they are in space, what state they are in internally, whether conditions are safe, and how things are changing over time. Each sensory system answers a different version of that question. Some systems focus on the external environment, others monitor the internal one. Some operate quickly and demand immediate response, others regulate slowly and quietly. Some intrude into awareness, others work best when they remain unnoticed. This diversity is not accidental. It reflects the demands of survival, regulation, and adaptation across evolutionary time. Reframing sensation in this way also clarifies why awareness is not the defining feature of a sense. Conscious experience is only one possible outcome of sensory processing. Much of the body's most important sensing never becomes a feeling at all. It becomes posture, stability, timing, or restraint. This does not make those senses less real. It makes them more fundamental. A richer scientific framework for sensation recognizes several key principles. Sensory systems rely on specialized receptors tuned to specific information. They convert physical or chemical changes into signals the body can use. They feed into networks that integrate, interpret, and regulate behavior. Awareness may arise, but it is not required. Perception, in turn, is something the brain constructs from these inputs. It is not a mirror of reality, but a working model shaped by prediction, context, and correction. This model is usually accurate enough to guide action, which is what matters most. Understanding this helps resolve long-standing confusions. It explains why perception can be reliable without being perfect, why different people experience the same world differently, why some senses feel vivid while others remain invisible, why the body often knows something before the mind does. It also softens the boundary between mind and body. Sensation is not something that happens to the body and is then reported to the brain. It is a distributed process involving cells, tissues, organs, and neural networks working together. The immune system senses molecular patterns. The lungs sense chemistry. Muscles sense stretch. The brain integrates all of this into a coherent state that supports action and rest. Seen this way, the senses are not a collection of tools competing for attention. They are collaborators maintaining balance. This perspective also restores a sense of continuity. Sensing does not begin with conscious experience, nor does it end when awareness fades. It begins during development, shapes the nervous system, guides daily life, and continues during sleep. It is present before memory and active after thought recedes. There is something quietly reassuring about this. The body does not rely on constant vigilance to function. It senses on its own behalf. It monitors, adjusts, and protects with a consistency that awareness could never sustain. Consciousness steps in when needed, but it is not responsible for everything. This does not diminish the role of awareness. It contextualizes it. Awareness becomes one layer in a larger system rather than the center of it. Returning to the five-sense model with this understanding changes how it feels. It no longer seems wrong. It seems incomplete in a very human way. A snapshot taken from the inside rather than a map of the whole process. The richer view does not ask that the familiar list be discarded. It invites it to be expanded. Sensing, in this expanded sense, is not about collecting experiences. It is about maintaining life. It is about detecting what matters, responding appropriately, and conserving resources when possible. Most of the time, this work happens quietly. When it succeeds, there is nothing to notice. That quiet success is not absence. It is evidence of coordination. As the discussion settles toward its close, what remains is not a new list to memorize, but a shift in perspective. The body is not a passive receiver of a few signals. It is an active sensing system, layered, adaptive, and deeply integrated. To sense is not simply to feel. It is to remain in balance, moment by moment, whether awareness is watching or not. The body does not wait for instruction before it begins to sense. It never has. From the earliest moments of development to the quietest hours of sleep, it gathers information, responds, adjusts, and maintains balance without asking to be noticed. This continuous activity is easy to overlook precisely because it works so well. Most of the time, there is no announcement when posture is corrected, when breathing adapts, when internal chemistry shifts back towards stability, or when potential harm is avoided before it becomes damage. The absence of disruption is the signal that sensing is succeeding. Seen as a whole, the body is not a collection of isolated organs reporting problems to a central authority. It is a distributed intelligence, composed of many sensing systems operating in parallel. Some detect the external world, Others monitor the internal state. Some act quickly. Others work slowly. All of them contribute to a living equilibrium that is maintained moment by moment. This equilibrium is not static. It is dynamic and responsive. The body adjusts continuously as conditions change, without needing to pause or reflect. When demands increase, systems shift into action. When demands ease, they recede again. Balance is not something achieved once and held. It is something renewed constantly. What makes this intelligence quiet is not weakness, but efficiency. Awareness is a limited resource. It cannot track every variable or regulate every process directly. The body solves this problem by delegating. Sensory systems monitor what matters. Regulatory systems respond. Conscious experience is invited in only when something requires deliberate attention. This arrangement allows life to feel smooth rather than overwhelming. It also invites a different kind of appreciation. Not admiration for dramatic moments of sensation, but respect for the countless small adjustments that prevent drama in the first place. The steady heartbeat, the effortless breath, the way balance holds even while the mind wanders. These processes are not background noise. They are the foundation that allows thought, emotion, and experience to unfold at all. Understanding the body in this way can change how discomfort is interpreted. Signals are no longer interruptions to be ignored, but information to be understood. Fatigue, tension, restlessness, or unease often reflect sensory systems reporting that conditions are drifting outside familiar ranges. Responding does not require alarm. Often it requires only small adjustments. Movement, rest, regularity, attention to rhythm rather than control. At the same time, understanding the quiet intelligence of the body can soften the urge to manage everything consciously. Much of what keeps life stable is already being handled. Trust becomes possible not because the system is perfect, but because it is adaptive. This trust does not mean passivity, it means cooperation. The body senses, the mind interprets. Together, they navigate a world that is constantly changing. Neither is in full control, and neither needs to be. Stability emerges from interaction rather than command. There is also comfort in recognizing that sensing does not depend on constant vigilance. Even when awareness fades, the body continues its work. During sleep, during rest, during moments of inattention, the same systems remain active, maintaining conditions and preparing for what comes next. Life does not pause when consciousness does. This continuity grounds experience. It places awareness within a larger context rather than at the center of everything. Thought becomes one layer among many, supported by processes that are older, steadier, and more patient than conscious planning could ever be. The idea of intelligence in this sense does not require calculation or foresight. It requires responsiveness, the ability to detect change and adjust accordingly. By that definition, the body is profoundly intelligent. Not loudly, not self-consciously, quietly. Appreciating this does not demand constant attention to bodily processes. In fact, the appreciation works best when it remains light, a recognition rather than an inspection, a sense that much is being handled already, even when awareness is elsewhere. This perspective can be grounding. It reminds the listener that they are not suspended in experience without support. There is a system beneath sensation, beneath thought, quietly maintaining balance. The senses in their expanded form are not there to overwhelm or distract. They are there to stabilize, to guide, to protect, to restore. When they succeed, there is little to notice, and that perhaps is the most reliable sign of their intelligence. The body listens constantly, it responds calmly, and it carries on moment by moment, whether it is being watched or not.